Hey, and welcome to Acting is Reacting with me, Joe, or JSP. Today, it's my first time on the channel, at least, where I'm just doing a straight out review, but I hope to make this a regular thing going forward, both of gigs and of new albums, as there's a ton of them coming out this year at least, and I want to talk about them to you. Hopefully, you want to listen. We shall find out. Anyway, today we're starting with gig reviews. This year, I've only been to two gigs so far, but they are two of my three favourite bands of all time. So even though they were a month or two ago, I am hopeful that it's not too late to talk about them and have somebody even be interested in what I had to say. Again, it's up to you whether that is the case. Either way, I'll be starting with Magnum. It's hard to think now that this time last year, the thought of seeing Magnum again was uh, a fairy tale, a dream. Obviously, most people will know that in early 2024 we lost Tony Clarkin, who was Magnum's songwriter, producer, guitarist, mastermind, you might say. And in his wonderful foil in Bob Catley, who looked horribly broken in a video he released saying that he couldn't continue Magnum without Tony, at around this time last year, we thought it was all over. But time heals some wounds, maybe, and it seemed right to Bob and the rest of the band to put on a small number of dates in tribute to Tony and get some of his wonderful songs out there in front of people again and see how it goes. And how it went was pretty damn well. This gig was moved from the Islington Assembly Hall in Islington, in London, where they played on the last 3 or 4 tours, I would say now. And it's a really nice venue, suits them perfectly. But too tiny for the audience who were wanting to come to this one. So we moved into the Kentish Town Forum, and maybe because they weren't touring in Europe, where they have a pretty strong following still, there was a fair contingent of European visitors in London that weekend coming over to see them. But also, I think pretty strong number of what you might term lapsed fans who had, for whatever reason, not seen the band in far, far too long. That's not the case with me. I've been seeing the band as often as I can since landing in London. So I saw them just a few months after I arrived in 2010 at the High Voltage Festival and have caught them on every tour since, at least once. For this series of gigs, our lineup is basically the same as it had been for the last three albums and the last tour. This lineup only managed one full proper tour with Tony, so obviously there's a fun exception to the lineup, which I'll get to in a moment. But otherwise, we have Lee Morris on drums, Rick Benton on guitar, Dennis Ward on bass, and of course, Bob Catley up front on the lead vocals. So to fill Tony's spot on stage, they brought in a youngish guy called Brendan Riley on guitar, and he was previously Tony's guitar tech, so they kept it in the family. And honestly, I don't think they could have made a better choice. Bob mentioned on stage that Brendan had the hardest job of anybody on the nights. This was the first night of the tour, by the way, and he lived up to every expectation and then some. For the first time ever at the Kentish Town Forum, I had to properly queue, to get into a Magnum gig. Normally, you can let the doors open and 10 minutes later you can just stroll in and then it will fill up. Not so on this occasion. A cold January night, but the venue were very well organised and got us all in pretty swiftly, I have to say. So props to them. And then there was pretty good buzz in the crowd before the whole thing kicked off. And on this occasion, they had decided not to do the usual thing of having a support band and then playing their set. They broke it into two sets of their own with no support. Didn't actually mean that they played really much longer than they normally would have over the years, but it did put the focus squarely on the band, and I think it worked pretty well. So set one was just to run through basically many of my favourite songs ever. Um, absolutely no complaints. Opening with How Far Jerusalem, which of course opens on A Storyteller's Night, their most classic album. moving swiftly on to Lost on the Road to Eternity from 2018, which, as it turned out, would be the most recent track that they played in the night. Uh, then winding right back to Wings of Heaven for Wild Swan. One of my all of these are one of my favourite tunes of all time. Um, and in between song 2 and 3, Bob spoke a little. He spoke a little bit more at this gig generally than he has in recent years, perhaps because the occasion warranted it. And he gave an early introduction to Brendan. He looked for the first, but certainly not the last time, like he was going to tear up. We were certainly tearing up in the crowd for various reasons. It was an emotional night. Um, so after Wild Swan, we went back to the Princess Alice and the Broken Arrow album, which is my first Magnum album, and the opening cut is really what I consider my introduction to the band in the first place when we were younger. That was up next, and as fabulous as always. But that would prove to be the second and final 21st century tune in the set, which was kind of a surprise given in recent years it's been closer to a 50-50 split between new material and the old favourites. But again, this is a slightly different night for a slightly different crowd, I guess. So um, after that, well, I mean, it was just classic after classic, including a few surprises, starting with The Tall Ships from Rock Art. So it's not one of my favourite albums, but The Tall Ships is, here I go again, one of my favourite songs, regardless. And then we had a trilogy of absolute debate classics of Tony's probably signature theme, which is anti-war, essentially. So we had The Flood from Sleepwalking, and then two of his World War One. I was going to call them both epics. Yes, they are both epics. One's just twice as long as the other. So, of course, I'm talking about Le Mort Dansant from On the Storyteller's Night. And then they finished set one with Don't Wake the Lion. If I had to choose one song as the ultimate Magnum song, or indeed my favourite, it's that. Um, but the emotional wallop of those songs back to back was intense. Um, So the interval came at just the right spot. It was bang on an hour into the show. And yeah, so about 15, 20 minutes before they came back for set two. And they kicked off with another anti war song. He's got a lot of them. Soldier of the Line, going back to Chase the Dragon in 1982. And the first time that had been in the set since, I believe, the Sacred Blood Divine Lies tour in 2016. That's nothing compared to what was next, which was Just Like an Arrow, which is one of those all-time classic Magnum singles that should have been a massive hit, but somehow only reached number 83 in the charts. I still don't understand what happened. But it was great to hear that, in my case, for the very first time live. And it's unlike the songs that have preceded it, it's just upbeat and energetic and fun. Yeah, a really nice change of pace. But we were swiftly brought back to earth, pun intended, um, for Need a Lot of Love, another song that I've never seen from live and hadn't been in the set for a full 20 years. Obviously from the Vigilante album originally and written in 1986, it touched at what were at the time very topical things, the Berlin Wall, uh, bombs in the streets of Belfast, and what was going on in Lebanon. So it's dated in that sense, but sadly, everything that's in the song is still happening today in different places, different names, but it's all still happening. So we do still need a lot of love. So another real highlight there. And then it was more of the traditional Magnum inset to back classics yet again with Storyteller's Night, All England's Eyes, I'll talk about that in a second, Vigilante and Kingdom of Madness closing the main second set. And then a couple of encores again, fairly obvious ones. No Sacred Hour, but we did get the Spirit dedicated, as indeed the whole night had been, but specifically this song to Tony, and ending with When the World Comes Down. Uh, Basically, a pretty perfect set list, and it went down extremely well with the crowd. For me, if I had a niggle, it would be the lack of more recent material, of which there's a lot of strong songs. To be honest, though, if I had to choose two to represent the century, I would have picked the two that they chose. So that's only one minor niggle. They were all on top form. Lee was on a bit of a riser, so he had a better view of him than I've had on some occasions, and he is just having the time of his life, as always up there. His joy is infectious. And then on the keys, you have a more solemn figure in the form of Rick Benton, but I would say, and look, there's been no slouches in the Magnum lineup ever, as far as I'm concerned, but Rick wins the award of best keyboardist ever in the band for me. I think what he's brought in recent tours and albums has been astonishing. Um, really rate him. And then, of course, you've got Dennis Ward on bass and backing vocals. His vocal blend with Bob is fabulous. And obviously, I've touched on this in the past that some people will tell you that Bob's voice is shot. Well, no, it's not. Um, does he sound like he did in 1988? Of course not. Does he sound blooming great? Yes, he does. Yeah, there's a bit more wear and tear, but he's 77. So we can forgive him that, I think. Uh, I have heard shot voices over the years, and believe me, his name does not belong on that list. No way. And then Brendan. Of course, I said earlier that he exceeded every expectation that had been landed at his feet, and pretty mammoth undertaking for this role. Yeah, just brilliant. It's hard to pick out any real highlights of the night, other than pretty much everything. Um, as I said, the emotion in the room was very strong, and Bob did almost fall apart when it came to the spirit, but he pulled through. And he did say, he kind of hinted that we might see them again somewhere, some way. If we do see them again in a tour, I hope they don't slip into being a nostalgia act the way they've managed to avoid being for the past 25 years. Um, the heavy emphasis on the 80s period for this particular show was absolutely fine, but I wouldn't want it to be a regular fixture if they do become a touring band. We presume that the recording career of the band has to be over because nobody but Tony can write and produce the songs for them. But we shall see. Meantime, hoping to see Bob again very shortly with Avantasia, which I will be reviewing gig and album in the coming weeks, all going well. So that's my longer than anticipated review of the Magnum gig. But if you do like me talking an awful lot about Magnum and you missed my Magnum live stream that I did ahead of the tour, well, you can check it out one side of my head now. Or in a moment, you can check out my next belated review for Toto and Christopher Cross. So I will just say thank you very much indeed for watching and listening to my rambles, and bye for now. But I hope not for long.
Acting is reacting. This does not mean acting again.